Hi guys, Buildzoid here, and today we're going to be taking a look at a Workstation motherboard from Gigabyte, the X299-WU8. And the reason why we're looking at this, because it is kind of irrelevant, right? It's X299, and after Ryzen 3rd Gen, why would you buy X299? But still, I think one or two people requested a PCB breakdown of this board, or it was one person making two comments on two separate videos about, getting this board done. Which I think actually one person requesting it twice is more likely than two separate people. But anyway, this board is a rather interesting because we obviously have 7 full-size PCIe slots and 2 of these chips right here. So what makes these interesting is these are PLX PEX8747 PCIe switches. And what's special about them is that you can take 3.0 16 lanes and convert them into, so you can go 16x to 3.0 32x, which is how this motherboard gets so many damn PCIe slots. Because with 2 of these chips, this board has enough PCIe lanes to actually run all of these slots at 16, 8, like if you fully populated them, right? So 16, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, and 8 again. Now, if you don't actually fully populate them, the board can run 16, 16, right? Like you can see this one's labeled 16. So it can do like 16, 16, 16, 16, or you can do like 16, 16, 8, 8, 8, or like a whole bunch of different combinations of, PCIe lane configurations. But, yeah, basically it supports an absolutely insane number of PCIe lanes. Now, the thing to keep in mind about PLX chips and kind of why they're relatively uncommon is there is a latency hit going through them. You add about 150 nanoseconds of latency to your PCIe communication, which does mean that you actually lose a little bit of performance on any device on the other end of a PLX chip because, it has to communicate through the PLX chip, and so there's that latency hit. Which, like, this might sound like a lot, but I think, like, at least for GPUs, it doesn't seem to actually affect their performance that much. I'm not sure if there's some other devices where it is actually a major issue. But anyway, so there's a latency hit, and the other thing is they don't actually give you more, like, you don't get 32 lanes of bandwidth. Keep in mind, like, you're still, you have 3.0 x16 going into the chip, and you have 32 lanes coming out of the chip, but you don't get more than x16 bandwidth. So the whole idea behind these chips is that you could potentially have something like, say, a GPU here, and then, I don't know, an X8 SSD in here, right? If you had like a full-size PCIe SSD. I'm not sure how well PLX chips play with M.2s. So you could have like a GPU, an SSD, another GPU, right? Maybe like a capture card. Just absolutely, you could just have a ridiculous loadout of devices hooked up to the motherboard. And basically, as long as you weren't trying to use them all at the same time, right, you actually would have no issues. So, like, if you weren't putting any load on the GPUs, or the GPUs just weren't using much of the available PCIe bandwidth, right, you can actually get full X8 SSD speed. Now, what you couldn't do is, like, say, like, if you did something like SSD, right, 16x, SSD, and then another SSD, and you tried to like RAID 0 them, you'd still hit the restriction of 3.0x16 plus that latency hit, right? So that wouldn't work. That's not what PLX chips are for. They're basically, they give you more flexibility in terms of PCIe lane assignment, but they don't actually give you more bandwidth. So that's something to keep in mind with them. Either way, they are really like, they are pretty cool in my opinion, because they do allow you to support like quad SLI setups on like Intel mainstream CPUs, AMD mainstream CPUs, though we've not yet seen a single AM4 motherboard with a PLX chip, mostly because I think AMD basically just wants like, if you want more PCIe lanes, you should just go buy a Threadripper. And the other thing is that PEX87s back in like, I want to say 2013 or 14, they used to be about $50 a piece. As of right now, because the company that, like, so the company that made PEX 8747s, they got bought up by Broadcom or something like that. But basically, the manufacturer of the PLX chip, of the PEX chips, is now different. And in the process, the price basically doubled. So these days, these chips are approaching $100, you know, even if you're buying them in bulk. So the end result is that they're really, really unpopular on motherboards these days. And yeah, I'm honestly kind of surprised that this motherboard exists at all because, you know, X299 already doesn't really have a shortage of lanes to start with. And ultimately, Gigabyte is only taking this board all the way up to 64 lanes total. So I guess the idea here is that this more directly competes against Threadripper, right, where Threadripper actually has 64 PCIe lanes pretty much directly from the CPU all the time. So this kind of gives you that same option through the PLX chips, but you know, this is not an ideal way of achieving this, and also it is very expensive, which is why, you know, like I guess it makes sense for a workstation board, but you really wouldn't see something like this on like, it used to be that like flagship mainstream Intel boards would come with PLX chips, but since Quad SLI is dead, and you know the Crossfire is completely dead, right? Like Navi doesn't support more than a single GPU setup. You know, it's just like, yeah, these are kind of useless these days for mainstream users, so it doesn't make sense to make like a flagship Z390 board with a PLX chip, right? Because like, what's anybody going to do with it? Like, potentially you could hook up a ton of M.2 SSDs to it and that kind of thing, but at that point, I think the board vendors and the CPU manufacturers would just go like, hey, go buy X299, right? Like, if you want to do that, just go buy X299 or like X399. Anyway, so that's kind of the highlight feature of this motherboard, is just lots and lots and lots of PCIe lanes, even though you don't really have more PCIe bandwidth than you would get with a regular X299 board, but still. You know, if you have a requirement for an absolutely ridiculous number of like X8 PCIe devices and you don't necessarily need a ton of bandwidth, then this works really well for you, doesn't it? Anyway, in between the PCIe slots, those of you who've been watching this channel for long enough would probably recognize that this right here is a VR, like this is a straight up VRM. Now, I'm not 100% certain what each of these does, but considering that there's two of them and these PLX chips actually have an 8-watt TDP, that's probably PLX power right there for both of them. So that's probably the PLX, and that's just a single phase of, you know, high side MOSFET, low side MOSFET, low side MOSFET. They're kind of going to cook under GPUs, because especially like the funny thing about large GPUs with big open air coolers is if you move air through those giant air coolers slowly, the air coming out of them is pretty damn hot, because it's been stuck, like it sat in the fin stack for a really long time. But anyway, though these are like, actually this might be pretty overkill for just 8 watts of power consumption, so that's probably not a concern. Anyway, yeah, you do get like single phase memory single phase VRMs just jammed in between the PCIe slots to power the PLX chips, which is a pretty unique way of doing it, because normally you'd see boards just keep all of the voltage regulators sort of in this area of the board, right? But Gigabyte, I guess they didn't want to like clearance the heat sinks or something for extra voltage regulators, because they have space, right? Like you can, well, I don't know. Maybe there's, you know, maybe one layer down from here, it's like traces upon traces for PCIe or whatever, and so there actually isn't any space to put any regular, put an actual voltage regulator there. But initially, I'd say you could probably fit move this like right here, and then move the other one maybe up there, and you'd be fine. But still, Gigabyte opted to put them between the PCIe slots. Other than that, this is a workstation board, but it does have a bunch of, overclocking goodies. So you have a clear CMOS switch, a reset button, a power button, and a post code, but located in the place where you're like, if you actually use all of the PCIe slots here that you paid for, you're not going to be able to use this because, unless you have like a 1x slot card in the one slot card in the last PCIe slot. But if you have a 2-slot card in here, yeah, you're not going to be able to see these or even really like reach these. So that, like, I really think on a board like this, especially on a board like this, like, maybe not necessarily the buttons, right? Because they're more for like test bench users, and this is a workstation board, so you'd assume that it lives in a case or some kind of box with external power buttons. So these aren't super necessary for that, but the post code, I think, should really not be down there. It should be up here, except Gigabyte decided to put the battery there. The thing is, you can actually get there's like ITX boards will have like batteries glued to their IO section. So it's just like this I really feel should not like be occupying the postcode area, because there's so many ways to like solve the issue of the board space that a battery occupies, that the fact that it's taking up space that I think really should have been for the postcode is just kind of silly in my opinion. Anyway, other than that, we also have dual BIOS located all the way over here, which is kind of funny. Like on most boards, the BIOS chips are relatively close to the battery, and then there's this board where it's just like they literally couldn't be any further away from the actual battery. Not that that really matters. It's just kind of, funny to me that, yeah, there's normally, the battery tries to be kind of close to them, and here it's just like other end of the board. But yeah, does have dual BIOS. Unfortunately, this doesn't have like the dual BIOS switches that you get on like other high-end Gigabyte motherboards, which I honestly find, like, personally, if you're doing a lot of like overclocking, that's actually really, really annoying, because if you keep failing to post a couple of times, the board will just randomly decide to switch BIOS chips, and any profiles you save are per BIOS chip. So if you go from the main BIOS chip to the backup BIOS chip, you lose all of your profiles, which is incredibly annoying. So, Gigabyte realizes that this is incredibly annoying, so a lot of their other high-end motherboards will have a chip, a switch to choose which BIOS chip you're on. This board, for some inexplicable reason, doesn't have one of those. So, yeah, I'm really not a fan of the fact that it's just like, yeah, you got the Gigabyte dual BIOS, but because the idea is that you can recover from, like, if you corrupt your BIOS or something like that, and that's great. But it's also like you could have just had a BIOS switch without all of the automatic stuff, because a BIOS switch alone would already solve the recovery issues. And yeah, but for whatever reason, Gigabyte insists on having the like smart software controlled dual BIOS system, which in my opinion is anything but smart and just annoying. It's still better than having just one BIOS chip, right? Because if you corrupt one BIOS chip, you're kind of screwed. But this system is like, it's like, if they made it simpler, I think it would have just been better. Anyway, so we do have those overclocking features on the board, and yeah, because the funny thing is like, you might be like, but Buildzoid, this is a workstation board. Why would anybody care about overclocking on this? Well, this doesn't support Xeons. If you look at the CPU support list for this board, it only supports Skylake X, like Core i7s and i9s. So basically, yeah, like you can't run a Xeon off of this. So this board does actually support some amount of does need to support some amount of overclocking, because it's like all the CPUs you can put in it are overclockable. And in the overclocking department, VRM wise, we're looking at what I would consider classic Gigabyte. Though it's not really that old, because this is basically a voltage regulator that they used everywhere on X99. So, and this right here is the VCC in. So that provides about 1.8 volts to the CPU's integrated voltage regulator. It's not a fully integrated voltage regulator, unlike on X99, because on X299 you have a bunch of external supporting rails like this one over here, which I do believe is still VCCSA. It's been a while since I've last done an X299 motherboard PCB breakdown, and I've forgotten the locations of all of the minor rails. So I think this one's VCCSA, and the one down here is VCCIO, but they might be switched around. I'm not 100% certain about that, but anyway, so we do have those, and because these are external and on the motherboard, the integrated voltage regulator on an X299 Skylake X chip is not technically a fully integrated voltage regulator, because on X99, VCCSA and VCCIO are actually generated by the fully integrated voltage regulator, right? It's basically, the distinction is just like, how many rails is the integrated voltage regulator actually regulating? On X99, it's all of them. Pretty much. Like, there might be one or two minor rails generated by an LDO somewhere on the board that are external, but all of the major rails that actually need like a buck converter to power them, those are done on chip and just converted, and just are like VCC in is just converted into them. On X299, VCC in only converts into vCore, vMesh, and I think VCCSA offset, which is a I'm not sure, like, it's an alternative voltage to VCCSA. I'm not sure what the exact distinction is there, because if I'm not mistaken, VCCSA on the Skylake X CPUs doesn't actually power anything. It just kind of exists on the platform because of the KB Lake X support. Yeah, like this rail doesn't really do much of anything with Skylake X CPUs. This one improves cache overclocking when you're sub-zero, but this one doesn't do anything. You can literally run it at like you can literally leave it at stock, and you can do just as much overclocking as if you set it to like 1.4 volts. In fact, well, no, it just doesn't make a difference. Anyway, so VCC in sits at about 1.8 volts, and feeds basically everything on the CPU. So, but it's not like it feeds vCore, vMesh, and all of that. So, yeah. And the idea behind having VCC in is that basically this is far easier on the motherboard in terms of doing voltage conversion compared to having, because the thing is, the idea behind the fully integrated voltage regulator, well, there's a whole bunch, you know what, we don't need to go into all of the reasons why the fully integrated voltage regulator is really, really cool, but it's really, really cool. Trust me, I'm just not going to go into the details because we'd be here forever. But anyway, so this produces just 1.8 volts, and the CPU converts that down into the actual voltages that it runs on. Now, this VRM is actually basically the same thing that Gigabyte used on their X99 boards, because it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 phase, controlled by an international rectifier IR35201. Now, I'm not sure if on X99 they used a 35201. It might have been a 35201, but I can't remember right now. It could have been some other, like, might have been some other international rectifier chip. But anyway, the 35201 does 8 phases, and that's exactly what it's configured as here for this 8-phase VCC in VRM, because every other rail here basically gets its own voltage regulator, which really drives up the cost of this board. But so that's what's going on with that. This is, the standard high-end voltage controller for motherboards for the last several years. And Gigabyte's just using all 8 phases just for VCC in. And for the power stages, we're looking at a bunch of IR3556s. So, yeah, we get, this is where I dislike the VRM. So these are 50 amp POW-IR stages. And the thing is, I know exactly why Gigabyte uses these instead of like the 3555, and it's very simple. Because once upon a time, 3555s literally went out of stock for quite a long period of time. So Gigabyte instead resorted to buying a bunch of 3556s, and they've been stuck with them ever since. Which is why like motherboards like, say, the X570 Aorus Master also use a bunch of 3556s instead of something better. Yeah, so, I can totally understand why Gigabyte is using a 50 amp POW-IR stage instead of a 40 amp, instead of a 60. The thing is that doesn't change the fact that this VRM is a little bit on the, like, actually not even a little bit, it's very much on the small side for X299. You really should, like, honestly, even 8 phases of 60 amp power stages, I think, is kind of pushing it in terms of, like, you're going to need quite a really well-designed heatsink to deal with the heat output at that point. But 50 amps is just like, you're just taking that issue and making it worse. And that's the case with this motherboard. But, so... And they could have opted for chips like 3575s, which are insanely expensive, but... Yeah, so, like, I totally understand why these are here, but that doesn't change the fact that I think they're kind of inadequate. At the same time, though, this is a workstation board, so, it's just like, and it is a workstation board that only supports overclockable CPUs, so, overclocked workstation, as counterintuitive as these two terms might be, I could totally, like, some people will run overclocked workstations. The main issue is just, like, you need to do a whole bunch of stability testing to validate that this thing isn't going to crash anytime soon, right? Because you're actually working on it, and so it's important if it crashes. And so the thing about the whole workstation consideration is that, like, you can technically push an X299 CPU on water cooling to the point where this VRM would actually kind of be a major issue. At the same time, if you're doing, like, reasonable overclocks, you're not going to be actually, like, this VRM shouldn't have too much of a problem with it. So let's talk efficiency, right? So This VRM for the 1.8 volts out, which we already have up there, 400 kilohertz switching frequency, and 5 volts drive voltage is going to be producing, is going to be able to push 100 amps out at about 14 watts of heat. Keep it like this might sound really high if you've been watching some of my recent PCB breakdowns for just 100 amps, but keep in mind that's 1.8 volts. So that's 180 watts going into the CPU and only 14 watts of heat being produced on the VRM. So the efficiency here is actually pretty damn good. Okay, like it might sound like this is a lot of heat relative to the current, but keep in mind very high voltage, which does mean that we actually produce a little bit more heat for the same amount of current. So anyway, going up from 100 amps to 200 amps, this VRM will produce about 31 watts of heat. Now, 360 watts is very, very coolable. This is if you have a custom water cooling loop, this is very easy to deal with. And this is honestly where I'd say, like, reasonable X299 overclocks will hit around that 360 to 400, maybe 450 watt mark, because past that, the cooling starts being a major problem, right? So in this 360 watt range, it's just like, okay, so the VRM will produce about 31 watts of heat, which is like, well, for a cramped 8-phase like this, that's actually quite hot. Now, Gigabyte has a relatively elaborate cooling system for this board, right? Lots and lots of surface area, heat pipe, and you have 2 sections to the heatsink, and like this is all VRM. Like this doesn't cool anything other than the VRM, so all of this is just VRM cooling. But yeah, I'm not sure. This looks like for 31 watts, it would probably still need forced airflow to really work well and keep the VRM under 100 degrees Celsius, but eyeballing heatsink performance is really, really hard. So don't take my word for that, and there's no way I'm going to actually get a chance to test the board. But yeah, like 31 watts of heat, like on say a 16 phase, that wouldn't necessarily be much of a problem to deal with, but this is an 8, and this is a very cramped 8. So yeah, this might not be ideal. Now, if we start pushing into the territory of people doing silly things with X299 for silly reasons, 300 amps of current output from the VRM will produce about 64 watts of heat on the VRM. You're going to want a water block at that point. Which for this is still just 540 watts of CPU power consumption. This is actually, like, if you're just doing benchmarking on like chilled water cooling or even regular water cooling, you can do like bursts of 540 watts. So admittedly, like, it'll take some time before the VRM overheats, if you're just benchmarking, but you could potentially get pretty close to this amount of current draw, like, sustained if you have a substantial enough cooling system. This isn't so far out there that it's like liquid nitrogen territory, where this motherboard actually shouldn't really be used at all, because 400 amps output, which is the absolute limit of what this VRM is spec'd for, right? 50 amp power stages, 8 of them, 400 amps, absolute limit. This VRM will produce about 114 watts of heat. Now, a good water block can definitely deal with that, right? If you have a water block on top of the VRM, this is actually no problem to deal with. It's just that is not even remotely efficient. Also, the CPU would be pulling about 720 watts, and that is very much liquid nitrogen, like sub-zero overclocking territory. So liquid nitrogen or like dry ice at the very least to get this kind of power consumption on the X299 platform. So I'd say the VRM, like personally, I'd prefer a stronger VRM, but at the same time, like, I think honestly, the board, the idea is that people running this board will probably stay around this area of the CPU, power consumption. And so the VRM should be relatively okay with that. But this is definitely like, nobody's going to buy this board for its VRM is basically what I'm getting at. Like, it's not terrible, but it's also not ideal. People buying this board are going to buy it for the PCIe slots and the PLX chips, not because the voltage regulator is some incredible piece of, power delivery circuitry right there, because, well, it isn't. Mostly in the sense that it just isn't big enough. Like, you just need more. You either need stronger power stages or you need more power stages. There's not really any other way around the whole issue of, well, X299 is just very, very power hungry. So yeah, but for mild X299 overclocking or sensible X299 overclocking, this is actually perfectly fine. I still just prefer more because, look at the channel name. But Anyway, so that's what's going on with the VRM. We do get dual 8-pin power connectors, which like kind of makes sense because, well, yeah, because, you know, 200 amps output current at 1.8 volts, you're going to be looking at 360 watts of CPU power consumption, but 391 watts on the actual 8 pins. And I assume the 8 pins also power things like the VCCSA and maybe also the memory rails. So, so at that point, it's just like, okay, technically speaking, a single 8-pin can do at least 384 watts. The bigger issue, however, tends to be that a lot of power supplies aren't necessarily wired optimally. So if you like, well, the minimum is 384 watts, and then if you have a power supply that's improper, like built properly, you can actually get like 8 pins to go all the way up to close to 600 watts and still be perfectly fine. The thing is, there's a lot of power supplies out there which can do the 384 watt figure just barely, and if you start pushing much more than that, they start, like, you basically have an issue with the temperature of the connector on the power supply end, not the connector on the motherboard end, because that one's fine. It's got 8 pins. But some power supplies will have CPU 8 pins that are like plugged into 6 pins or something on the power supply end because they wanted like universal support for PCIe and CPU from the same connector or whatever. So so basically, you know, Gigabyte opted for the dual. Like this is a platform where the dual 8 pins make sense. Also, you know, something like a 220 amp overclock wouldn't really increase the heat output of the VRM too much, but you would also like start, you know, exceeding the minimum rating of a single 8 pin. So at that point, having dual 8 pins is a good idea. Though, honestly, even just an 8-pin and a 4-pin would already be enough in terms of how much power you need. The thing is that most power supplies that support an 8-pin plus a 4-pin configuration also support dual 8-pins. So at that point, you might just, you know, from the motherboard, in my opinion, if you're making the motherboard, you can just put dual 8-pins on there, and that's, you know, you've solved the issue. So, yeah, and plus, if for some reason somebody had a power supply that only supports an 8-pin and a 4-pin, you can still plug a 4-pin into an 8-pin. That's not a problem. Like, the way these connectors are designed is it's 2 4-pin, like, it's basically 2 4-pins combined. So you can, like, plug in half an 8-pin just fine into an 8-pin connector. That works okay. So, yeah, like this is a platform where dual 8 pins, in my opinion, is a totally reasonable number of power connectors. Unlike on, say, Z390, where dual 8 pins is just a waste of board space, and 90% of, you know, for 90% of motherboards on Z390, dual 8 pins waste of board space. Anyway, so that's what's going on with the VCC in right here. For VCCSA, we're going into like this is typical Gigabyte as far as I'm concerned. Single phase. Controller is an IR35204. Yep, 35204, which is basically a 35201 with less phases. The power stage right here is, of course, an international rectifier IR3553, which is a 40 amp POW IR stage. So same family of products as the IR3556. In fact, I do believe these are like footprint compatible. Like you can put a 3553 on a 3556 footprint. But anyway, yeah, Gigabyte loves using these. They're like on their motherboards, you find them everywhere. And so we have one for VCCSA right here, which is more than enough for that. Then for memory power, we get another 35204, 35204, two-phase memory power with two 3553s. So memory power right here is massive overkill. Then for VPP, we get yet another, well, I assume yet another 3553. Just because Gigabyte's done this in the past on like X99 boards where it's just like, oh yeah, you have 240, like 80 amps for your DDR4 power, and then 40 amps for the VPP rail, which is a rail so weak that on a lot of motherboards it's hard to find because the voltage regulator is so small. But this board, obviously, you know, is just like, well, who cares about saving money, right? on using a weaker power stage when you can just use a 40 amp one. Though I assume Gigabyte just has piles of these lying around. Because they do really like Gigabyte has been putting excessive amounts of 3553s onto their motherboards for like several years now. I'm pretty sure they just have too many of them, and they don't know what to do with them at this point. Because as soon as a motherboard is like relatively high end from Gigabyte, it's just like everything and anything has a chance of being powered by our 3553 because they seem to have an endless supply of them. Anyway, so VPP down here is also probably a 3553. I'm saying probably because IR does technically make like integrated buck converters that use a similar package, and I didn't really take a close-up picture of this area of the board. So yeah, and that's our VDDR. On the other side of the CPU socket, we just get more of the same. There's a 35204 right here. And then we have a, 3553 there, 3553 there. This is your memory VRM. That's VDDR. 2 phases, kind of interesting layout with, one being above the other, but doesn't really make that much of a difference. So VDDR, and then a VPP down here, which, a single phase, also controlled by the 35204. So these are both running in like 2+1 phase mode. Or at least I assume. Like, assuming this is a 3553, then it's controlled by the 35204s. So running in 2+1. Though this one here is obviously running in just like 1+0 mode, which very excessive, right? But the thing is I think like the thing is at that point is just like if you're already using a bunch of 35204s for your other rails, it might just be easier to keep using them instead of looking for another, more cost-effective controller to use. Because the other thing is also if you want to use like an IR controller, like if you want to use an IR power stage, then you need an IR controller ideally. And then it's just like, okay, so, it doesn't necessarily make that much sense from a for manufacturing to have like 3 different international rectifier controllers with 3 different phase counts. It's just easier at some point to just have like one that has a lot of phases for the VCC in, and then have a 35204 for anything else that needs a power stage, but doesn't need so many phases. Anyway, down here, the VCCIO, this is probably, well, that's almost certainly another 35204, and this is definitely another 3553. And yeah, very, very Gigabyte motherboard. So all of these, like VDDR is insane overkill, right? 2 40 amp power stages for memory power is excessive to the extreme. VCC in is just kind of what I would consider adequate for the platform. I really would prefer if it was more substantial, at least like 60 amp power stages or better. But it's not like the 50s will cause issues unless you're really like pushing one of the 18 cores to the limit. VCCSA is plenty powerful as well. Like I do believe this rail only goes up to like 10 amps max. VCCIO is even less power than VCCSA, which I think is why VCCSA gets to be under the heatsink, and VCCIO on most motherboards just kind of sits somewhere awkwardly, completely passive. Yeah, VDDR we've already talked about. So VRM wise, this is like the thing is, this is very similar to X99 boards from Gigabyte, because you'd get this exact same VCC and VRM, and then you'd get the exact same, VDDR VPP configuration, where I'm not sure if the controllers were the same, but the phase counts and the component selection was identical. Like, higher end X99 Gigabyte was this. And yeah, they've just kind of bolted it onto X299 here. Feature I forgot to mention, 6-pin, extra 6-pin power for your PCIe slots, which of course is very handy if you're running a lot of high power consumption GPUs. If you're using, actually, the funny thing is on most motherboards, when I talk about having an extra 6-pin for PCIe power, I talk about like quad fire RX 480s, right, as being like the extreme use case. But with a motherboard like this, if you used a bunch of PCIe slot risers that don't come with like external power connectors, like say, the usual risers like that don't have power connectors on them. Well, if you put like 7 Vegas in this, even like 7 Vegas would actually get pretty close to overloading a 24-pin. I think. Actually, no, they wouldn't. Because I think Vega, if I remember correctly, Vegas pull like 30 watts off of the PCIe slot, worst case scenario. So with 7, no, that actually, okay. 7 Vegas would get very close to overloading a 24-pin, but they shouldn't quite be enough yet. But just in case, you do get the extra 6-pin power connector. It's not in the optimal location, but to be fair, this board is a little bit cramped for space with the, PLX chips and PCIe slots and just kind of everything. Though I kind of feel like they could have just scrapped the audio section and put the 6-pin down there, but yeah, I'm not sure why, like, well, I don't know. I think anybody doing like a proper audio workstation will have their own sound cards, so for them this is irrelevant. And for any, I feel like, you know, oversized audio section on boards like this just don't make sense, because people who care about audio won't use it, and people who don't care about audio, well, they don't care about audio, so they don't care that, you know, if the audio was worse. But anyway, yeah, big cramp. So the 6-pin is in, like, the funny thing is this is actually a really common location for a lot of motherboards to put the extra 6-pin, but it's just like, it's not a good location. It's still, like, at least it's usable, but it's not, in my opinion, an optimal location, just because you have to now run a cable that goes like that or like this. Though admittedly in a workstation, well, no, because for me it's more of a, like, cable routing is to me more of a, like, a maintenance thing than a, like, looks thing, right? And if you have a cable that's running, like, above your GPUs, that means that's one more thing you need to unplug if you want to swap out any GPUs. And if it's running, you know, through this area, well, I guess if you run it through this area, it's fine. Though I'm not sure that there's any power supply with PCIe cables long enough to go, like, all the way from below the board up over the top and then back down. Extensions do exist, though. And, you know, going across here, yeah, I guess going across here also wouldn't cause any issues. So, yeah, but I'm still not a fan of it just being in the center of the board. Anyway, above that, we also get an LED to indicate CPU initialization and GPU initialization. And I think at this point I've covered all of the sort of PCB side features. Oh, wait, I forgot to mention output filtering for the vCore VRM and VCCSA is entirely handled by all of these lovely tantalum capacitors. I do believe these are from Panasonic. And why is this significant? Well, tantalum capacitors are more expensive, and also because they come in this lovely SMD package, they are electrically superior to your aluminum polymers. Through-hole aluminum polymers. So, yeah, this motherboard is like, the thing is, here it's not like you'd see something like this on a lot of, like, high-end overclocking boards, or at least you used to. But there are still boards that do this, like, say, look at the Z390 Dark, right? Look at the output filter on that. But on this board, this is being done basically just because they physically couldn't fit through-hole capacitors on the other side of the board. I mean, just look at how much space there is, right? Like, yeah, you're not fitting any capacitors right there. Just, it's not happening. So, yeah, you get slightly better capacitors because of space constraints, which is, well, not slightly better, but better capacitors because of space constraints. Though, endurance-wise, these aren't actually significantly better than aluminum polymers. These are actually quite sensitive to overheating compared to aluminum polymers. The thing is, as long as you run them at operating temperature, these last forever. So, yeah, they're kind of interesting. It's just like, as long as you keep them within, like, safe temperatures, they're great. And if they get too hot, they actually tend to they can potentially actually die quite violently, where they'll, like, explode in some cases. But yeah, you know, as long as they don't overheat, you're fine. That's kind of the main issue with these. So yeah, but though I'm also not sure how much you need to overheat them. Like, I don't think their operating temperature spec is, like, you can exceed it by a certain number of degrees before it's, like, you run into the serious danger zone. I've not like, the thing about my interest in capacitors is I'm more interested about, like, having the best ESR and the best ESL, more so than how long the capacitor is going to last, because I don't really run the hardware under harsh conditions for that long. Right, like, it might be a couple of hours of extreme torture, but it's a couple hours, not thousands of hours. So, yeah, which this being a workstation board, if it's like rendering or something, that might be a bit of a concern. But also, the cooling system on this motherboard is, you know, it should be good enough. I'd assume, right? Like, we do have quite a substantial heatsink, so as long as nobody's, like, pushing a 9980XE to, like, the absolute limit of what a 99XE can do, this board should be pretty much fine even in that department. Now, what's also interesting is actually the heatsink assembly for the chipset and the PLX chip. So PLX chips get pretty hot, right? They're 8 watts each. And funnily enough, this is what the chipset heatsink looks like from behind. So for whatever reason, Gigabyte actually assigned the biggest fin stack to cooling the smallest heat load, which is the chipset itself. And then the smaller fin stack has to deal with the two 8-watt PLX chips. Honestly, when I first saw pictures of this board, I thought this fin stack has the heat pipe going like that. But yeah, no, this one has to deal with the PLX chips, and this one has to deal with the chipset. So, you know, overall, it's an interesting motherboard. It's definitely not the kind of like though there's just a few design decisions that I'm just not really a fan of. Like I think the chipset heatsink and the PLX chip heatsink should be swapped around, right? Like the bigger fin stack should be for the PLX chips and the smaller fin stack for the chipset. Though admittedly it's just like the PLX chips need, like, for you'd want the PLX chips relatively close to the actual PCIe lane, so it is kind of awkward with, like, you'd have to run a heat pipe that basically looks like this to get it where because the larger of the two fin stacks actually lives right here, right? So yeah, actually it goes all the way, because there's the screw hole for it. It goes all the way up there. So yeah, getting a heat pipe like that would be kind of awkward. And then you couldn't heatsink, like have a heat pipe for the chipset itself, because it would have to like cross over that way, which not very convenient. But yeah, so not really a huge fan of like like still, like ultimately, as long as the PLX chips aren't overheating, right? It doesn't matter that the bigger fin stack is on the wrong chip, in my opinion. But it definitely wouldn't hurt if they ran cooler. And since you already have this giant fin stack, you may as well use it for whatever runs the hottest, in my opinion. But probably doesn't make enough of a difference to actually matter. And then for the VRM, I mean, I've already shared my thoughts on that. So yeah, this is an interesting board. The issue is, I think I don't really I don't deal with proper workstation builds really. So my personal system is a pile of junk. So, it's like technically I work on it, but it's not what I would consider like a proper workstation. So, it's just like, I feel like I can't really say too much about like if this board is fit for how it's like the intent, if it fits the intended use case perfectly. I'm not really sure I can talk about that too much. But what I can definitely tell you is PLX chips are kind of cool, and this has way too many PCIe lanes, and then the VRMs are just kind of like, well, high-end X99, so, barely, like, I think kind of push, like, it's basically I'm not a fan of that VCCN on X299. It's that simple. It should have, like, 2 phases more or 60 amp power stages, one of the two. Actually, I'd prefer 2 phases more. 10 phases would be a significant upgrade. But yeah, anyway, so that is the Gigabyte X299-WU8, and that's it for the video. So thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon and a Teespring. So Teespring, you can buy shirts, stickers, posters, all kinds of AHOC sort of merch. And then, of course, if you don't want to buy anything, there is the Patreon where you can just support me directly each month, or for 1 month, whatever you feel like. And there's links to both down in the description below. They help out with running the channel immensely. And yeah, thanks for watching, and goodbye.